Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rice Club. We're here again talking about Game of Thrones. So, Game of Thrones has finally ended. The series wrapped up. We did a podcast on the series finale and some discussion on the entire show in its entirety. Please check it out if you have time. There's still some things I still wanted to discuss, so that's why I'm recording this today. Just some last thoughts and some musings. So let's just jump into it. I mean, so obviously the show finished and there were some very negative reactions regarding the last episode and the last series the last season as a whole. If you look at IMDb, there were users who averaged the scores of all the episodes of all the seasons, and the first 7 seasons consistently ranked in the high 8s or in the 9s. But once you got to the last season, Game of Thrones was ranked, I think it was about like a 4.5 or a 5. So obviously a significant drop in rating score. Now, in general, sometimes it is difficult. I'll give you this. It is difficult to end a very successful show in a way that is satisfying and is conclusive. But pretty much Game of Thrones, the last season, pretty much got universal criticism about the writing, the pacing, how short the season was, and so on and so forth. So where did it all go wrong? Now, this is just my take on the show. There's a lot of different opinions out there, which is totally fine. Just wanted to present how I felt about the show and where the signs of trouble started appearing. So to be honest, I can't give a specific point in the show where, things just started unraveling. But one of the first signs for me was season 7. And the first reason is the time traveling in season 7. What I mean by this is people just fast traveling. If you've played video games, there's a concept called fast travel where you click a spot in the map and suddenly your character teleports there instead of, manually having to travel there. So we saw this in season 7 with Jon and Daenerys traveling to and from the north, the wall so quickly. If you remember how I believe Daenerys was on Dragonstone and she, within like half an episode, she like suddenly made her way all the way to the north to help Jon Snow, who was Jon Snow and company who were beset upon by, White Walkers. So when you basically have this ability to fast travel, to time travel wherever you want, this really breaks immersion. Game of Thrones is a very meticulously crafted show. It's a very detail-oriented show. The pacing is very tight. It's very deliberate. So you might have an entire season where characters are just traveling and they don't make their destination to the end of the season. Just look at some of the episodes, like season 5. I think it was season 5 where Jaime was in Dorne. They were in Dorne for the entire season. If you look at Sandor Clegane and Arya, they spent episodes upon episodes just traveling through Westeros to get to the Vale. So when you really have just one episode of people, essentially teleporting through the entire continent, that really breaks my engagement of the show, and that's really troubling. If you looked at a map of Westeros, you can kind of have a good idea of the scale of the show. The Winterfell is really far from King's Landing. The Wall is even further. So when you have this ability to just travel super quickly, the scale of Westeros is just all off. It's just completely nuked. We also saw, like, for example, Jamie Lannister. I think he went to the Reach in High Garden super quickly, and then suddenly he was sieging River Run. And while these locations aren't as far as west as Winterfell, there's still some distance between these locations and King's Landing. So when you have the ability to just suddenly show up at these places, like in one jump cut, you're at the location. It really that meticulous planning, that pacing of prior seasons, is just you kind of have to throw that out of the window, and it's very jarring. Now, these issues also appear in season 8. We saw that our characters and I think in season 8 it's even worse because, firstly, we have all our protagonists, our characters fighting in Winterfell on episode 3. And I think by episode 4, they're actually, I believe, at King's Landing near the end. There was a parley scene where, originally I thought they were just in some fortress area or some castle away from King's Landing, but it turned, I think it actually was King's Landing. So in one episode, they traveled all the way north, from all the way north to kind of pretty much the south of Westeros. So the entire pacing of the show is just out of whack. It's just completely out of the window. What I would have liked is at least throw in some scenes of troops marching or gatherings of allies or, some war room discussions or something. It's just something to let us know that some time has passed. But we didn't get any of this. So again, the problems emerge. The problems that we saw in season 7 continue to season 8. Actually, there's a couple of other examples that I wanted to talk about. Another great example about the pacing about the show is I believe it was season 1 or 2 where the Night's Watch, they were they're traveling up north, and, they went to the Fist of the First Men, and, they went to Craster's Keep. These episodes are paced extremely well because they spent a lot of time developing characters, traveling, talking to people, giving the audience a sense of the scope, the environment, the people that were there. So when you really just fast travel like that, it really appears to the audience that you're just trying to rush through everything, trying to just get everyone to the right locations without really building that narrative. So it's just very weak storytelling, very weak writing. Another thing that fans started mentioning about how off track the show has become was through the White Walker capturing plot. Now, what that is, if you don't remember, it's where Jon Snow and the gang travel north to capture a white for Cersei to prove to her that there is an existential threat to Westeros, to try to convince her to fight for the side of the living. But firstly, this plot point is just really silly because it just seems so absurd. You're lumping all the good guys into Team Dany and all the bad guys with Team Cersei. Team Daenerys, you had, Jon Snow, the Hound, Arya, Beric, Sam. You had all these, quote, good guys. And on Team Cersei, you had, like, Mountain, Quiver, and you had Euron, which is all the bad guys. And it just kind of feels like a generic good versus bad scenario. Game of Thrones was always about multiple characters with different motivations, desires, and stories, to the point where you didn't know who to trust. You didn't know, who was plotting against whom. And that's what made the show really interesting and super captivating. So when you just split people into two camps, it really just makes it stale and binary. And you kind of insulting thing is even if you split up, the writers still couldn't figure out how to end the show, even with this um, dichotomy of like good versus evil, Team Dany versus Team Cersei. They still butchered some endings of some characters like Jaime and Jon Snow. And now this is kind of a this point that I want to bring up of why the show started faltering. This started happening when Peter Baelish died, and that's the lack of political intrigue. Game of Thrones started off as a great political thriller, as a show about political intrigue, motivations, conversations, character dialogue, and the such. And this made the show very suspenseful, dramatic, thrilling. Just look at the plot at the beginning. Ned Stark has to investigate what happened to Jon Arryn. How did he die? And then he stumbles upon the plot of someone had poisoned Jon Arryn, the truth about the Baratheon children / Lannister children. It was started as a mystery, this political thriller involving many different actors and characters. It really sucked you in, and you didn't know who to trust. You didn't know who was going to backstab who. It was just a great show. So once Littlefinger died, we didn't have this anymore. All the tension that we saw left was between Jon and Daenerys, and a little bit of Varys and Tyrion, but that was a drop in the bucket compared to what we saw in the first couple seasons. So basically, when Peter Baelish died, this basically signified the end of charismatic characters like Varys, Tyrion, stuff like that. People who weren't good because of their fighting skills, but because of their talking about above their scheming, of their conversational skills. I mean, actually, yeah, even Cersei got weaker too, because she was generally a person who relied on like fear of, going above and beyond to protect her children. She would do all these terrible things like blowing up the Sept of Baelor just for her children or for political victories. Even she got butchered. Yeah. So again, why I liked the early couple seasons of Game of Thrones, because we saw all these mysteries set up, all these mysteries beginning, which really, all these intertwining mysteries and all these different motivations of the characters, like Stannis and Renly. They were two brothers who fought for the throne. Gendry, which is the bastard child that they had to sneak off. Who would win the Iron Throne? How would Ned Stark be avenged? Sons of the Harpy, even though I hated that plot, but we had to figure out who they were. These were all just great plot points that, well, it was so well written and crafted compared to what we got in the last season, which is basically just some crappy, stale vanilla ending. And again, the lack of charismatic characters really sunk the show into the ground, because Game of Thrones was always driven by dialogue and narrative. So through dialogue and character development, we got to know more about a character. We got to know more about their motivations. Who are they fighting for? If they were honorable, dishonorable, if they were a cheat, if they were a liar. We got to know so much about a character just through discussion and conversation. We didn't need those action sequences to make the show great. By just looking at what a character is saying, how they are saying it, we get to know so much about them. So, all these reasons really coming together just really made the show extremely weak. And this is what we got, season 8. It was such a disappointment. So, some people, that's kind of my take, my last couple thoughts about the show. I know people have said, it started going down on season 5 or 6, which is, I think there were some shaky parts, but I think generally season 5 and season 6 were all right. Season 7, I had to suspend my disbelief because I knew that season 8 was coming, and then at season 8, I just couldn't, I hated it. So I hope you guys agree with some of my points. about, how season 7 kind of set up the foundation of failure for the show. The fast traveling, the lack of political intrigue, and the grouping of people into two camps, how that kind of sunk the show and laid the groundwork for season 8 and how it completely failed. So let me know what you guys think. You can go to www.thericeclub.wordpress.com. Leave us a comment there. Don't forget to share our Anchor podcast to others. Thanks for listening, and have a great evening.